While they were talking, it was pouring. The rain. It was raining really hard out there. They could tell, everyone could, because the rain was hitting the tin roof on that barn. Some of you may know what that sounds like, even though they were down in the lower part of the barn. Uh, but the story came to the end, and Elaine then took Boris over to meet her family and friends. He was just as debonair, you might say, as could be. I mean, they it took a long time before they could understand. They had to kind of hear the story and stuff, but he was just such a perfect gentleman. As he was introduced, he said, "I'm very pleased to meet you," and she introduced him to Edwin Mundo, Edgy, and Boris said, "Pleased to meet you," and Edgy said, "Diletto extraordinario," which was a quote from the movie Amadeus, and at which Boris said, "Well, you didn't have to swear at me, but the pleasure is mine, absolutely," which was also from that movie. He'd seen that movie too. You're going to find out Boris was actually a very well-educated, I want to say boy, man too, before the change came, the change that had now been kind of undone. So anyway, he was introduced around to Violet and of course Omar and Indira. They already knew him, and he then he was curious about what was going on here with the piece of paper and all this stuff, and they explained about the scroll and told him in brief this story about Lance and how he'd left it there and how Wedge just felt that it was the Holy Grail, and sort of told that story, and what they knew already, some of it. It gave him something to talk about. I mean, this was so strange to have him there. And Duke, he for his part, he was a little distrusting. Can this be real? What he's seen. Well, anyway, Boris said, "Well, let me see what's that material in those plastic bags. Can I see that? I might be able to help you here a little bit. I see there's some wood there and there's some metal stuff. This is Boris speaking. He says, I've worked my whole adult life after the military service. I've worked at the pallet factory, and so I've worked with a lot of wood, and if you let me take a look at it, I'll tell you what I can find out from that." Well, he did, and I want to say a word about Boris's hands. He clearly was a huge, very strong man, but his hands were delicate. They didn't look weak by any means. They looked very strong. But you'd normally think that they would be all calloused and gnarled. No, his fingers were delicate. And as he was handling this wood, I may have to damp that furnace. I smell smoke a little bit. I don't care, but my son might. As he was handling the wood, he said, "Well, you've got this is all rough sawn wood. You've got nothing here that's planed. And this piece of wood, he could hold these. He says, now that's been split from a piece of 1 by something. You see it's sawed on 5 sides, but then the one edge has been split. So it could have been a 1 by 1, a 1 by 2, 4, 1 by 6, 1 by 8. You can't really tell, but it's a rough sawn 1 by, and it's oak. Or hard, well, this is oak, he said. So there's that. And it's short, but that's the material that they're using. And then he took another piece and he said, now this is thin, and it's also been split, but it's only a 1/2 inch. And that's from a pallet, a slat on a pallet. And there's 2 of them that were almost alike, and they'd been split as well. One he said was hardwood, it was oak, looked like, and the other was pine. He said if it were a bigger piece, you could tell when you picked them up that they weigh so much differently. So he had that, and there was another piece of wood there. He picked that up. He says, "Now this is a shingle. This is the end of a shingle, and where the carpenters use them as wedges, and they also call them shims. If something is not really tight, they'll use a piece of a shingle." And that's just a little bit of a piece here, but there's enough that I could know. Well, when Gladys heard that wedges, she's still thinking about the scroll. She perked up and asked about that, and Boris said, "Yeah, when you're working with one by stuff, the rough sawn, you can't really be all that accurate. Really, about a quarter-inch tolerance you've got to allow about everywhere." And once again, Gladys perked up because quarter-inch tolerance, that was in the scroll. She was amazed at that. So anyway, that was those were the pieces of wood. And he said, "Here's what that was wrapped in. That's a piece of bunker cover. We farmers we use that for silage. It's 9 mil bunker cover. That's what that stuff is." And a couple pieces of there's the baggies, and there's a couple pieces of duct tape. Everybody knows duct tape. And he says, "Let me take a look at at what's in that other baggie, the hardware." And he reached in there and he pulled out the smaller nail, small of the 3 nails, the small. He said, "This is a 6-penny. This is a 6-penny nail." Why we use a 6-penny? Maybe it's because it's just about 2 inches long. 8-penny would be longer. 6 pennies, just about 2 inches. And so if you're nailing 2 1-bys together, you can nail it, and the nail won't stick out on the lower side, especially if you put it at a little bit of an angle. That's why I can imagine a 1x6 would be here if you're building something with it. And then the next one, bigger. He said, "Now this is an 8-penny nail, and it's if you're going to nail, say, a 1-by into something, and you need to penetrate a little deeper. That's what you'd use for that." Both of them and that bigger one, they're all bright, sometimes called bright or common nails they're called. There's nothing fancy, no ring shank. It's just a kind of a normal nail. And he said, "Now that bigger one, that's a 10-penny. But that's not a common nail. That's a box nail. Do you see that it's thinner, the shank? Now, I don't know why there would be a box nail in there." At which point Duke spoke up, and he said, "I've got an idea there. There's no screws in that bag." And in the old days, what they would do with things like doors and stuff, they'd drive a nail in and they'd clinch the end and across the grain. And if you have a box nail with a smaller wire, it would clinch better. Well, at that, Boris looked at Duke and said, "Wow, you're right. That's pretty good thinking." He was impressed. And then there was a little piece of wire. I think I said that's electric fence wire. I don't know why it's there, but that's just normal electric fence wire. Then he came to the bolt, and there was that grit. He saw that grit that was, and he knew right away what that was. That's broken off a concrete block. I don't know what it's be doing in there, but that's what that is. So it's an indicator that concrete blocks maybe would need to be used. And now that bolt, he said, that's a carriage bolt. It's got a rounded head on top, and that's what you use when you don't want the head sticking up. The shank goes into the wood and holds itself, and it lays almost flush. And why it's so long, I don't know. And the flat washer, that would be not for where the head is, it would be at the bottom. And then the fact that there's 2 nuts there, those 2 nuts, some old timers call them taps. Now that's the way my dad was, he called them taps. But most people call them nuts. And there's 2 of them there because you can lock them together, one against the other, and they'll lock. almost like a rivet, and they won't wiggle loose if it vibrates or not. And you know, everybody was just kind of wow. He this was his world. He knew this kind of material real well. And he said, yeah, when you do that, that's called double nutting. And then he looked up and he said, that's like me. I used to be double nutted myself until I ran into Elaine. And then they all laughed. Everybody laughed at that.